Hello, boys and girls, and welcome back. Today's book we'll be reading Frederick Douglass, and it's by Barbara Kramer. Who was Frederick Douglass? Frederick Douglass was born a slave. He worked hard for his master for no money. His master told Douglass where to live, what to eat, and what to do. After 20 years as a slave, Douglass escaped. He began speaking out against slavery. He didn't stop until all the slaves were free. Then he worked to help freed slaves have better lives. Born a slave. Douglas was born in February 1818 on a farm in Tolbert County, Maryland, USA. Soon after his birth, his mother was sent to work on another farm. Douglas only saw her 4 or 5 times. She died when he was 7. He never knew his father. Douglas spent his early years with his grandparents. They lived in a cabin about 12 miles from his master's farm. All right, and it is a picture. As an adult, Douglas had this cabin built in his backyard in Washington, D.C. It looked like the one where he had lived with his grandparents. When Douglas was about 6 years old, his grandmother took him to their master's farm. She didn't want to leave him there, but she had to do what their owner said. Douglas knew then that he was expected to obey the master too. About 2 years later, Douglas was sent to Baltimore, Maryland to work. He had heard stories about that city and was excited to go. In his own words, I didn't know I was a slave until I found out I couldn't do the things I wanted. In his time. In the 1820s, growing up as a slave was very different from growing up as a child who was free. All right. Learning to read. In Baltimore, Douglas worked for Hugh Alide and his wife. He took care of their young son and ran errands. Mrs. Ahid started teaching Douglas to read. Mr. Ahid told her to stop. He said slaves should know only one thing, how to obey their master. But Douglas kept learning. He gave biscuits to poor white children he met on his errands. In return, they helped him read. That's a fact. With 50 cents Douglas earned from polishing shoes, he bought a book of famous speeches and read it many times. This wood engraving shows Mrs. Lahid teaching Douglas to read. When Douglas was 15, he was sent back to the farm. His master had died. He now had a new owner. Douglas had to work hard in the field. He was often treated badly. He tried to escape, but he was caught. Other slave owners were angry. Douglas had set a bad example for their slaves. To avoid trouble, Douglas's new master sent Douglas back to Baltimore to work for the Heed family again. Runaway slave. In Baltimore, Douglas met free black people. He fell in love with a free black woman named Anna Marie. More than ever, he wanted to be free. On September 3rd, 1838, he tried to escape again. He headed north by boat and train. If he were caught, he might be killed or sold. But he made it to New York, a free state. He sent for Anna and they got married. Douglas and Anna moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts, USA. There, Douglas met people who wanted to abolish slavery. What do you think the word abolish means? In 1841, he spoke at one of their meetings. Douglas told the crowd about his life as a slave. The people liked his speech. Douglas soon began traveling to many states giving speeches about slavery. He also wrote a book about his life as a slave. Right, and this is the book in which Douglas wrote about his life, sold many copies. Douglas had escaped, but he was still a slave. Soon he became well known for his speeches and his book. That put him in danger. Now it was easier for his master to find him. Douglas had to get away, but it meant leaving his family behind. He sailed to England. He gave speeches there and made many friends. They raised money to buy his freedom. At last, Douglas was free. Cold, cool facts about Douglas. All right, they have a number one. As a young man in Baltimore, Douglas learned to play the violin. It was a hobby he enjoyed the rest of his life. Douglas met with President Abraham Lincoln three times during the Civil War. After the president died, Mrs. Lincoln gave her husband's favorite walking stick to Douglas. Douglas became active in the Underground Railroad. His home in Rochester, New York was a stopping place. Runaway slaves could hide there until it was safe to travel to the next stop. Today, people can visit there. Douglas was known as a great storyteller. He often made friends and audiences laugh with his tales. Douglas wrote three books about his life: Narrative of a Life of Frederick Douglass, My Bondage, and My Freedom, and Lifetimes of Frederick Douglass. In 1899, 4 years after Douglass died, a statue of him was built in Rochester, New York. It was the first time an African American was honored with a statue. A fight to end slavery. In 1847, Douglas returned to the United States. He moved his family to Rochester, New York. There he started a newspaper called the North Star. He wrote articles against slavery for the paper. That's a fact. Two of Douglas's sons were among the first African Americans to sign up to fight in the Civil War. That was Charles Douglas and Lewis Douglas. People in the United States did not agree about slavery. That led to the start of the Civil War in 1861. Douglas organized a group of African Americans to fight in that war. New beginnings. The Civil War led to the end of slavery, but black people were still not treated the same as white people. Douglas gave speeches about treating all people the same. In 1882, Anna got sick and died. Douglas was sad and lonely. About 2 years later, he married Helen Pitts. That upset many people because Helen was white. Douglass never stopped speaking out to help others. On February 20th, 1895, he gave a speech to a women's group. He died at home later that day. He was 77 years old. Douglass was a powerful voice for those who believe that all people should be treated equally. Today, his words still inspire others all over the world. The end. And that was the book Frederick Douglass, you guys. I hope you enjoyed this book today, and I will see you again next time. Bye bye.